To our apostolic family, we thank you. To the pastor of our church, Dr. Brazier, we thank the Brazier family. There are some people in this world who simply cannot be introduced. These are the people who are so groundbreaking and remarkably relevant that they exist at the level of our collective consciousness. Some folks are not just popular, they are significant. And whenever you come across people like that, they need not be introduced, only presented. We don't need anybody to introduce us to Vice President Kamala Harris. She has always been a part of our community, from graduating from Howard University to a proud member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, just down the block from here. She has always been a part of the ethos and the grandeur of Black life. Her heritage stands across the roads of two communities, and she has dared to make each of them proud. Not only do we know her, but the people who don't like us know the name Vice President Kamala Harris. People who are mired in bigotry and hatred have come to know the name of Vice President Kamala Harris. People who make threats against democracy and have no compassion for the least of these have certainly found out who this remarkable woman happens to be. And every time she wakes up in the morning, I'm sure there are some adversaries of our cause and our culture and against America who say, man, she is at it again. She won't stop, because she is a woman who has stood up for women's rights, for what we know should be a constitutional right, for a woman to have the right to make decisions on the autonomy of her body. Here is a woman who does not dissimulate, but says what she means, and she means what she says. I want you to understand that we are in the presence of someone who is not only the Attorney General for the state of California, not only a former United States Senator, and not only the Vice President of the United States of America, but she is probably, perhaps more importantly, a Proverbs 31st chapter woman. That is to say, she is a woman of tremendous character, someone that brings good and no harm. She works not only to provide for her family, but for millions of families of those that don't have lobbyists and special interests that walk the corridors of power in Washington, D.C. She is our advocate. Vice President Harris sets about her work vigorously, and her light does not go out at night because she even shines in the dark. Even when entire segments of the American population resents the fact that a woman of color is one heartbeat away from being the most powerful person on earth, she continues to shine. Do you know how fearless and committed you have to be to walk into places every day where you know people don't think you deserve to be there, and yet you shine every day? Do you have any idea how much faith and how much dignity you have to have when people say, we would like to turn back the hands of time to when blacks and browns did not have the rights that we have today? They want us to ask permission for us to be who we naturally are and enjoy all of the fruits of American citizenship. And Vice President Harris, I want to personally thank you for standing in the way of these tyrants. I see them every day in Washington. I want to personally thank Vice President Harris for casting the most tie-breaking votes in the history of any vice president, fulfilling the role of the President of the United States Senate. And by the way, that hasn't happened since 1832, 191 years ago. 31 times you've said no to policies and legislation that would undermine the promise of America for all people. 31 times you stood in the way of those tyrants who thought about the rich and only wanted to serve the interest of those who have already been well served. 31 remarkable times you stood up for what this nation might be, and in doing so, you are now in the shadows of the Reverend Martin Luther King. 31 times you stood up for American working families. 31 times you stood up to fight for what has been right. 31 times you stood up to say yes to freedom, yes to equality, yes to the dignity of men and women. 31 times you've done it, and I thank you, Vice President Kamala Harris. What she has done in the Senate is a manifestation of what Reverend Martin Luther King died to do in the streets. And somebody needs to thank the Vice President of the United States for having stood in the breach and defended our interests. Madam Vice President, with your permission, might I have a point of personal privilege? I just learned that. This week, my father announced his retirement. Now he has pivoted. He can't retire. He's a pastor and he's a freedom fighter. Give the Reverend Jesse Jackson another loving round of applause. I do fundamentally believe, Dad, that the nation owes you a debt of gratitude for how you've continued to do the work of your mentor, the Reverend Martin Luther King, and almost single-handedly changed the content, the tone, and the direction of the Democratic Party. President Barack Obama, Vice President Kamala Harris, and almost every other Black elected official, most of all, me, would not be here without you for what you did in 1984 and 1988. You changed public policy in America, and all you had, all Dad had, was a Bible. You helped to create the kind of America that would allow your middle son to represent the 1st Congressional District of Illinois. I would not be here without you, Mom and Dad. I gotta wrap it up now. I could think all day long. Rainbow Push is a civil rights organization, Reverend Haynes, but everybody can't march in the streets. If America is to be the nation we want it to be, we need people sitting at the table when the policies are being crafted and haven't forgotten who they are. Marching in the streets without somebody sitting at the table defeats the purpose of marching in the first place. Reverend Martin Luther King told us to agitate and then negotiate, and then to deliver tangible outcomes for the people that we are serving who live under the iron hills of oppression. I say to all of my young activists, friends, let the marchers march. That's our tradition. And let the protesters protest. That is our tradition. But don't you ever underestimate the value and the importance of the people we send to the table. These are the people who deliver on the social and political climate that you have helped to create. And I don't care what anybody says about the Biden-Harris administration. I've seen it up close and personal on your behalf. They have already delivered for the American people. In the last administration prior to the Biden-Harris administration, we were promised an infrastructure bill every week after week after week, and not one shovel went in the ground. The Biden-Harris passed the legislation for infrastructure. That's what they've already done. And let me tell you, work is now plentiful. This administration has passed laws to combat climate change. There are more people working in this country today than has ever been in the history of America. This administration rescued our economy that was mishandled by the previous administration. This administration expanded the benefits and services to veterans in a way that has never, ever been done before. The Biden-Harris administration passed meaningful gun law reform the first time in 30 years. They protected LGBTQ rights. We have to continue to fight. They put the first African-American woman, Ketanji Brown Jackson, on the United States Supreme Court. This administration has delivered. And through the American Rescue Act, this administration has provided support to millions of people who would have otherwise drowned in the sea of economic inequality. On behalf of all of us, Vice President Harris, thank you for being in the room where it happens. And we thank you for not being one of those members of our community who gets to where they are and then forgets how they got there. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am not here to introduce her. I am merely here to present to you the Vice President of the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the podium Vice President Kamala Harris.
Good afternoon. Please have a seat. I said to the congressman, I didn't know he could preach like that. Oh, good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank the congressman for that extraordinary presentation and for his work. I recently had the congressman at my home for dinner, and we talked about his father and we talked about his vision as the son of the father for the future of our country. And I have seen him at work when the cameras are on, when the cameras are off in Washington, D.C., doing the work of representing his district. And he truly, truly is a national leader. Thank you, Congressman, for that introduction. I want to thank Dr. Byron Brazier and First Lady for the warm welcome here at Apostolic Church of God. I want to thank Mayor Brandon Johnson, who I knew could not be with us today, but he has been a true champion for working families, and I want to recognize him. And to the members of Congress who are here, the state and local elected leaders, and all of the folks who are part of the leadership of this beautiful community and our nation. I thank you, and for that warm welcome, thank you. I also must, and it is my joy to congratulate Reverend Dr. Freddie Haynes. So I have known him and worked with him for over 20 years, including when we worked together years and years ago in the early days of the criminal justice reform movement. And I am so confident in his leadership and his ability to carry on the greatest traditions of this organization and to meet the challenges of this moment. Congratulations, Reverend Haynes. And now to my friend, our great leader, Reverend Jesse Jackson, and his incredible family, including Mrs. Jackie Jackson. I want to thank you all for the leadership that you continue to provide. Yours is a family of service and sacrifice, and always inspiring the people around our nation, and I thank you for that. And a special thank you to Santita. Where is Santita? Santita and I were students at Howard University together. And she was a leader on campus back then. So it is good to be with everyone. So today, we celebrate one of America's greatest patriots, someone who deeply believes in the promise of our country, a fighter for freedom and human rights for all people. At the core of Rev's work is the belief that the diversity of our nation is not a weakness or an afterthought, but instead our greatest strength. In his life's work, he has reinforced that no matter who we are or where we come from, we have so much more in common than what separates us. The point is that if we as a society are to come together, to work together, to fight together in common cause for the freedom, rights, and justice of all people, we must make our communities stronger. We must build a stronger nation. And as a result, we will have a stronger democracy and a stronger world. And it is with this understanding, this vision, to see what can be unburdened by what has been, that Rev has dedicated his life to building that coalition. From Washington, D.C. to California, from the Mississippi Delta to Appalachia, from South Africa to the south side of Chicago. He has and continues to bring together people of all backgrounds, Black Americans, Asian Americans, Latino Americans, farmers, LGBTQ plus Americans, Native Americans, women, labor, union members, people with disabilities, our young leaders, and people around the world. That has been the work of Reverend Jesse Jackson. And early on, just think about it, early on, he even had the audacity to name this coalition the National Rainbow Coalition. Think about that. He defined the rainbow. He was one of the first to define the rainbow. A coalition to push the values of democracy and liberty and equality and justice. Not from the top down, but from the bottom up and the outside in. He has built coalitions that expanded who has a voice and a seat at the table. And in so doing, he has expanded our democracy, the democracy of our nation. And he has done this work his whole life, always understanding that being clear-eyed is so important, and in particular, the importance of living in a way that we understand we must be present if we are to have a future. He has always been clear-eyed about the moment we are in, Think about it. As an 18-year-old, at the height of segregation, Rev brought people together at the Greenville Public Library sit-in. And he continued this work around the country and around the globe, whether it was to expand rights for farm workers and increase wages for care workers, to increase access to capital for small business owners, to make boardrooms on Wall Street reflect the diversity of our nation, or to help end the sin of apartheid, to help secure the relief of hostages and empower entrepreneurs across the United States and the continent of Africa and the world. This is the span of his work. And it is the span of his vision of what an individual can do to move forward our nation and the world. And I will tell you, Rev's work inspired me from a young age to understand the power of the coalition. So I grew up in a neighborhood of hardworking folks, nurses and firefighters and construction workers and teachers in Oakland and Berkeley, California. I was raised by parents who met while they were protesting for civil rights in the 1960s and who would take me to those marches while I was in a stroller. At the earliest stages of my life, I recognized the power of standing in solidarity at a protest or a picket line. And later, I saw the power of Rev's coalition when I was in law school. So when I was in law school, I was back in California after I left Howard, and I drove a Toyota Corolla. It was a fancy car for me. And I had a bumper sticker in the back window, Jesse Jackson for president. And so I would drive back and forth from Oakland, where I lived, to San Francisco, where I went to school. And I would drive across the Bay Bridge, if anybody knows the Bay Area. And I'll tell you, I was so struck and impressed when the first time that I did that drive with that bumper sticker, the number of truck drivers and people in other cars who would honk their horn or throw a thumbs up sign. People of every walk of life. And I was so struck by that coalition that I saw as we were all commuting to and fro, who understood Rev's vision, one in which all people can dream about their future with ambition and aspiration, no matter the color of their skin, the place of their birth, the God they worship, or the people they love. That has always been part of the strength and the brilliance of Rev's work. Those folks, I believe, they were honking and throwing a thumbs up in favor of fighting for freedom and for opportunity. Powered by his vision and the coalition that believed in it, Rev ran for president in 1984 and again in 1988, winning 13 primaries from South Carolina to Alaska. Let us remember that. And like Shirley Chisholm 12 years before, Rev has widened the path for generations that would follow, including President Barack Obama and me as the first Black woman to serve as Vice President of the United States. I am clear about that. I am clear about that. And even before I served as vice president throughout my career, I often worked with Rev to do the work of taking his direction on how we should expand the coalition. As district attorney of San Francisco, I worked with him to bring together law enforcement in the community so we could save people and help people have their voice be present around the injustices that were occurring, and also do what we should do to be smart in terms of how we achieve public safety. As Attorney General of California, I worked with him on consumer protection issues, and in particular because I took on and sued the big banks of the United States during the foreclosure crisis, and Rev was right there with his leadership supporting homeowners of America in terms of protecting their right to the American dream. And as United States Senator, I was proud to work with Rev as we did the work that we have an ongoing mission to do, which is to secure the right to vote for all people. And then in 2020, we worked together with folks across our country to mobilize that same coalition, to organize and to register voters. And as a result, Joe Biden and I went to the White House. So more than 60 years after that first sit-in at that library in Greenville, Rev has remained tireless in the fight to expand voting rights, to encourage innovation and partnerships across the continent of Africa, and to secure economic justice for all Americans. So we congratulate you, Rev, on your pivot. I got the memo. And as President Biden said today, Rev, you are a man of God and you are a man of the people. And we thank you for all that you are. And so in the spirit of your ongoing work, Rev, I do believe that it is critically important that we who have been inspired by your leadership take on our responsibility to see clearly the moment we are now in. And let us acknowledge that the fight is more important than ever. Because, church, in this moment, across our country, we are witnessing hard-fought, hard-won freedoms under full-on attack by extremist so-called leaders. And these extremists have an agenda to divide us as a nation, an agenda to attack the importance of diversity and equity and inclusion and the unity of the Rainbow Coalition. These extremists wrote legislation and brought litigation to the United States Supreme Court, the Court of Thurgood, in 2013 in Shelby v. Holder, to destroy hard-fought, hard-won rights around the legitimate responsibility a government has to ensure that the people have unfettered access to the ballot. They laid the groundwork for the Dobbs decision last year, when the court took away a constitutional right that had been recognized from the people of America, from the women of America, took the right of every woman to make decisions about her own body, not having the government tell her what she's supposed to do. These extremists went back to the Supreme Court, and last month, the court cut off access to opportunity when they gutted affirmative action and student debt relief. And these extremists won a case that allows businesses to discriminate against the American people. State by state across our nation, these extremists ban books in the year of our Lord 2023. They ban books and prevent the teaching of America's full history. All the while, they refuse reasonable gun safety laws to keep our children safe. Understand what's happening. Let us understand the moment we are in. And we know in these dark moments, history shines a light on our path. And so in this moment, let us all understand the history and the significance of Rev's work and his approach. Just as Rev has shown, our ability to stand together is our strength. Our ability to unify as many peoples is our strength. And the heroes of this moment will be those who bring us together in coalition. Those who know that one's strength is not measured based on who you beat down, but who you lift up. So let us stand together, united and strong, knowing as Rev has always understood, we refuse to throw up our hands when it is time to roll up our sleeves. And as the great Coretta Scott King taught us, the fight for civil rights must be fought and won with each and every generation. And alas, that is our work. And our gains will not be permanent if we are not vigilant. And as we know from Romans chapter 5, verse 5, hope does not disappoint us. So fueled by the love of our country, just as Rev has done his entire career, let us keep hope alive. Let us keep hope alive. Let us march. Let us vote. Let us fight, knowing when we fight, we win. May God bless you and may God bless America. Thank you.